Chapter 32, Crystal Peak. The TX showing up here was the one thing that Connor knew he should have counted on, but had not. Kate was losing it. The TX had become her worst nightmare. "Come on, come on, the next prompt!" Connor shouted at her. She looked at him. Her mouth worked, but no sounds came out. She remained frozen, but then she blinked as if she were waking from a trance and turned back to the security screen. "Red 176, she replied. Connor flipped through the cards, his hands shaking. He dropped them and had to scramble on his hands and knees to pick them up. He found the correct card. Avalon 412. Kate punched in the new code. The reader beeped twice. The prompt disappeared from the screen and was replaced by a single word. Authorized. An alarm came to life, and red warning lights began to rotate as a powerful metallic bang reverberated in the steel door. It began to rise on the hum of powerful motors. But it was slow, ungreased metal on metal squealing in protest, a deep rumbling vibration spreading through the tunnel. Small rocks skittered down the walls and dust drifted down from the ceiling. The TX was halfway up the tunnel and moving fast. Too fast, Connor gauged. They would never make it through to the other side and get the blast doors closed and locked before she was on them. They were so damned close. Connor pushed Kate aside and reached into his knapsack for a brick of C4 and a fuse. He might be able to buy them some time by setting off a charge as far down the tunnel as he could toss it. If the timing was right, he might be able to bring down a section of roof on top of the TX's head. If he was off, he could bring the roof down on him and Kate. A tremendous noise filled the tunnel. It was even louder than the rising blast door. It took Connor just a moment to identify what he was hearing. It was another helicopter, this one much larger than the one the TX had crashed into the tunnel. He stepped back another pace. TX heard the same deep-throated thump of large rotor blades lifting a heavy machine, and she stopped and turned just as a large troop transport chopper crashed through the already breached tunnel entrance. This one moved much faster than hers. Its rotors sheared off immediately on the tunnel walls, and the fuselage dropped to the concrete floor. Its weight and momentum carried it over and through the parked trucks, jeeps, and even the bulldozer, all of which exploded like firecrackers on a string. Still it came, shearing past the Iroquois helicopter and careening down the tunnel like an express train on tracks of fire and sparks. TX spun on her heel and headed in a dead run down the tunnel towards where Connor and Kate stood, momentarily stunned, rooted in place. The helicopter was right on her back. Connor came alive first. He grabbed Kate by the arm and propelled her across the tunnel to a maintenance trench in the concrete floor. They leaped into it, and Connor shoved her down below the edge, shielding her body with his. The transport helicopter and vehicles it had picked up smashed into the TX, engulfing the cyborg in twisted metal and flames. The chopper finally ground to a halt, pieces of burning wreckage flying down the tunnel and hammering off the blast door. A different siren started to blare, and another set of red and yellow warning lights began to strobe. Connor and Kate lifted up from the edge of the trench in time to see Terminator emerge from the twisted wreckage of the helicopter. Half his skin and much of his clothing had been sheared away and burned off, in the intense heat of the aviation gas-fed flames. His metallic endoskeleton was exposed, and even some of his hydraulics and electromechanical mechanisms were open to the air. But he moved like his old self, with a smooth determination. And though much of his Duraplast skin was gone or shredded, they could recognize his usual sardonic expression. Connor had never been so glad to see anyone in his life. Terminator stepped in front of the trench and looked down at them. "I'm back," he said. The blast door had only opened a couple of feet and then stopped. Connor and Kate jumped out of the trench as the security keypad and LED screen began beeping. The screen was flashing a new message. Abort emergency closure. The blast door started to close with a tremendous squeal. The fire had triggered some emergency circuit. Connor had a feeling that there would be no way to override it. Terminator brushed past Connor, got down on his hands and knees, and pulled himself under the closing blast door, catching the bottom part of it with his powerful shoulder. The motors lowering the door hummed in overload. Sparks flew from around the edges of the mechanism, and groaning gears stripped with loud cracks, as Terminator put his back into the effort of not only holding the massive steel blast door from closing, but to raise it 1 millimeter at a time. Behind them, within the twisted, burning wreckage of the transport helicopter, TX managed to shove an engine block off her chest. She raised her head and torso above the flames, her optical sensors locked on the bottom of the blast door. Her infiltration covering was completely gone now, leaving only her battle chassis that itself was scarred and dented from the tremendous heat and forces it had endured over the past 24 hours. But TX's imperatives were still intact. Her programs were still up and running, and her prime directive was still driving her actions. She had been sent to eliminate 22 targets. John Connor and Catherine Brewster were at the top of the list. They were here. She would kill them. Terminator's internal mechanisms were strained to their limits, exceeding even their built-in safety and redundancy engineering. He knew that he would not be able to hold out much longer. He was also aware that the TX was struggling to free itself from the wreckage. There was no time left. "Go!" he told Connor and Kate. "Now!" The fire and smoke were getting thick in the tunnel, making it difficult to see, let alone breathe. Connor tossed the heavy knapsack filled with C4 under the blast door, sliding it all the way through to the other side. He helped Kate crawl under the door. She paused long enough to give Terminator a grateful look, and then scrambled the rest of the way through. Connor got down on his stomach and pulled himself under the massive blast door that vibrated like a live beast just above his head. Terminator's body trembled with exertion. Connor could hear overloaded hydraulics and servo motors and smell the stench of burnt electronic circuitry. A joint in Terminator's shoulder failed with a loud pop, and hydraulic fluid began to spurt from beneath the mechanism. "Thank you," Connor said. He had lost this friend once before. It was very hard to go through it again. So much had happened, so much had gone on. "We'll meet again," Terminator said, with as much emotion as was possible for a cyborg. Connor scrambled the rest of the way under the door, which, at the base, was nearly 2 meters thick. Kate was there. She reached down for him when something clamped over his left ankle, tearing into his flesh. The pain was impossible to bear, and he screamed. The TX, her legs sheared off in the wreckage, held on to Connor's ankle with her right hand and began to inexorably draw him back under the blast door. Terminator grabbed her wrist with one hand and her throat with the other in an effort to drag her away from Connor. In the effort, his shoulder turned away from the blast door that then inched downward, pinning him and the TX like a hydraulic press. The buzzsaw morphed from the TX's left hand, and she drove it into Terminator's chest, just above his one remaining power cell. Terminator tightened his grip on her wrist, bending hydraulic joints out of position, causing her finally to lose her grip on Connor's ankle. The door was pinning their torsos even more tightly now. Nevertheless, the TX managed to bring the saw up from Terminator's chest, into his neck, and then into his chin and cranial case. Circuits shorted out, and massive dumps of random data no longer under the control of subroutines cascaded like shivers through his CPU and servos. Still, he did not release his grip. Although with what little RAM was left in his cognitive circuits, he finally reduced his chances of success to 0%. His body, broader at the shoulders and in the chest than the TX's, was being crushed by the lowering blast door. He could feel all of his systems going offline, one by one, and there was nothing he could do to stop his own destruction. He brought up John Connor's image, now and in the future, superimposed over the images of Catherine Brewster, now and then. They were not machines. They were humans, creatures his original programmers had meant for him to eliminate. But a montage of pictures of interactions with Connor and Catherine Brewster rippled across his dying memory circuits. One final course of action was left open to him. The only logical choice. He released his grip on the TX, and for a second their optical sensors locked together. The TX withdrew the saw and started to crawl the rest of the way under the blast door. Terminator pulled aside the armor plating in his chest to expose his last hydrogen fuel cell. Without hesitation, he yanked the cell out of his chest, trailing wires and mechanical parts, sparks and fluids flying in all directions. With his free hand, he grabbed the TX by a piece of tubing protruding from her hip and dragged her back. She turned and fixed him with a baleful gaze. "You are terminated," he told her. Terminator crushed the fuel cell to rupture it and thrust it into the TX's mouth, driving it deep into her throat. "Eat me," Terminator said, and the fuel cell erupted with a tremendous explosion.